This video is relevant to paper 3, political ideas, ideologies and socialism. And we're going to look at the first of our socialist key thinkers. And for the first time, we've got a double act as a key thinker. It's Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And any understanding of socialism has to have a grounding in Marx and Engels. Now, that is not to say that they are the first socialists. That is very much not the case. But what Marx and Engels are able to do in 1848 is they're able to put the general ideas of socialism into one document in the form of the Communist Manifesto. Before we move on to how Engels and Marx view human nature, the state, society and the economy, we'll talk a little bit about their background. Both men were born in Prussia, East Germany, in the early 1800s, and both men died in London in the late 1800s. And their lives follow a similar trajectory. We'll start with Marx, who's pictured on the right. Marx was born in Germany in 1818. His father had converted to Protestantism in order to help him in his career. Heinrich Marx, his dad, was descended from Jewish rabbis, but he himself was not religious. His conversion to Protestantism is to help him in his place of work because of commonplace anti-Semitism. People were more likely to require the services of a Protestant lawyer than a Jewish one in Germany in the early 1800s. But what's important is that despite that conversion, that's not because of any significant religious belief. And that lack of religious belief is something that he passes on to Karl Marx, his son, and we'll talk about that later on. But Marx's story, although he marries his wife Jenny, they end up, Marx in particular bounces around from Paris to Brussels. He eventually ends up finding himself living in London. And when Marx dies in 1883, he is a stateless person. He isn't a citizen of any country of Europe because his ideas are considered so dangerous. Now, the second half of this double act is Friedrich Engels, and quite often Engels gets left out of the story somewhat. He was again born in Prussia in the same area as Marx. 2 years later in 1820, he was born into a family of wealthy textile mill owners, and they owned mills both in Germany but also in Salford in the northwest of England. In 1842, Engels' father sends him off to Salford to sort of look out for the family business, but also to discourage Engels of these radical ideas that he has been expressing. But what he does is he becomes exposed to the condition of the working class in England, which becomes the title of a book that he writes later in the 1800s. When he goes to England, he sees what the working class condition is and how they live. And if anything, it pours fuel on the fire of Engels' radicalism. On his way back home in 1844, he bumps into Karl Marx in Paris. Actually, when they first meet, reportedly they didn't hit it off. Both had been members of the Young Hegelians in Germany when they were younger. Marx had left that organisation. He thought that Engels was still loyal to it, and so they didn't get off on the right foot. But they managed to patch things up because they become almost inseparable. And Engels eventually is going to bankroll Karl Marx's way of life. He's going to, with the profits from the textile industry in Salford, fund Marx's research as he writes, first of all, the Communist Manifesto alongside Engels, but then later when he's writing Das Kapital. So upon his return to England, Engels is under police surveillance, again because of these radical ideas that he has been attributed to. And what Engels has to do is live in false addresses, in secret houses around Salford under false names. He is with, in the long term, an Irish woman called Mary, but they never marry because neither buys into the concept of marriage. In fact, Engels was quite the scoundrel in his private life. But whenever you see anything Engels has written on paper, it wasn't monogamy that he was against. It was the institution of marriage and how religion controls that. In 1870, he has to move to London, which is where he dies in 1895. So we've got two East Germans who meet in England and die in London. And as I said, they are not the first people to come up with socialist concepts and ideas, but they're certainly the first two individuals to give a clear account of what socialism means to them, and they're going to inspire millions around the globe with their works. Okay, what do Marx and Engels have to say about human nature, the society, state and economy? In previous videos, I've started at human nature because quite often that is the basis of the other ideas. But with Marx and Engels, we're going to start with the economy. And the reason for that is that Marx and Engels view history as a series of stages. And each stage of history is influenced by a conflict between different groups of people. So even today, if someone is referred to as a Marxist historian, they're viewing a particular area or era of history as a struggle between the haves and the have-nots, between those with power and wealth and those without. So, human history is a series of stages. From primitive societies, what emerges eventually is slavery, then feudalism. So we've gone from the era of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and the enslavement of individuals of a lower class to feudalism, where a king controls all land and rents that or gifts that out based on an individual's loyalty. But what emerges from feudalism is capitalism. Feudalism creates a middle class, and you are able to join what Marx and Engels call the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie emerges from feudalism, and so begins the era of capitalism. So for Marx and Engels, capitalism is not a theory of how to run the economy. Capitalism is a period of history. And for capitalism, its very survival relies upon exploitation. You cannot be a kind member of the bourgeoisie, according to Marx and Engels. If you are an employer who pays a decent wage, takes care of your workers, it invests company profit into those workers, into feeding them or housing them, all you are going to do if you do that is hurt your profits. The business is going to suffer. And in capitalism, there is always going to be somebody more cutthroat than you waiting in the wings, ready to take your business. So for Marx and Engels, only the most exploitative employers could survive. So the bourgeoisie had to exploit the proletariat. And we'll go on to those two groups in a moment when we do society. But for Marx and Engels, capitalism is one of many stages of history. Capitalism will end. The revolution that Marx and Engels talk about to overthrow capitalism isn't something they want to happen. In their minds, it's something that will happen, because capitalism is self-destructive. Because it's based on exploitation, what happens over time is more and more people are exploited until we reach breaking point. And that breaking point is the revolution, when those who have been exploited rise up against those that control them. And that will be the end of capitalism. But that view of the economy affects absolutely everything else. So let's jump over to human nature. According to Marx and Engels, we are naturally fraternal and altruistic and cooperative. We care about each other. We want what's best for one another. We want to see our fellow human being doing well. However, our human nature is also manipulated. It's malleable. It can be changed. How we view the world depends on the situation that we are brought up into. And for Marx and Engels, an individual who's been brought up in capitalism has false values. It's called false consciousness. If you grow up in capitalism, you become greedy and selfish and uncaring. And it's that individual selfish nature that capitalism poisons us with, that gives us these false values, this false consciousness. It tells us to value the wrong things. It teaches us to value greed rather than cooperation. So Marx and Engels are positive on human nature, but not as it is. Whereas a liberal is happy with our human nature naturally, socialists are, certainly Marx and Engels, are positive about what human nature can become, because capitalism has eroded it and manipulated it. Let's jump to society then next. So when it comes to society, we are broadly split into two social classes: the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, the middle class. Now there are smaller groups within that, but for at this standard at A level, you don't need to know about those groups. But society in capitalism is fatally split between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the haves and the have-nots. And capitalism as a stage of history is beset by this conflict, the class conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels write about the bourgeoisie as an emperor, a sorcerer, who has cast up this spell from the netherworld and can no longer control it. And what Marx and Engels are alluding to is that the bourgeoisie has to survive by exploiting the proletariat. But in doing so, the proletariat will eventually reach class consciousness. And that is when that class consciousness is achieved, when the proletariat realise their situation and the exploitation that they've been subject to, they will rise up in revolution against the bourgeoisie. And the stage of history after capitalism is socialism. And for Marx and Engels, socialism was the dictatorship of the proletariat. So after the revolution, the wealth of the bourgeoisie, the power structures controlled by the bourgeoisie will be seized and it will be distributed to the people. And so society is split. But for Marx and Engels, after the revolution and after the redistribution of wealth that happens during the dictatorship of the proletariat, what eventually emerges is a classless society. And for Marx and Engels, this was the most perfect society that could be envisioned, one without that conflict and the exploitation that capitalism provides us with. Okay, finally, let's talk about the state. So, the liberal state, the capitalist state, exists with one sole purpose in mind, according to Marx and Engels, and that is to serve the needs of the dominant class. And so all of the structures of the state are built to protect that social class and serve to keep the proletariat in their place. So the structures of the liberal state cannot survive the revolution because they have been designed with exploitation in mind. They have been designed by the bourgeoisie to protect the bourgeoisie. And what Marx and Engels predict is that the revolution will destroy the liberal state and a new socialist state would emerge in its place. So the dictatorship of the proletariat, the state would intervene to redistribute that wealth. Now, according to Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, the state then should become less necessary, and in Marx and Engels' words, wither away. So the final stage of history, what Marx and Engels call the end of history, is communism. That's not just a classless society, but one without those state structures. So the socialist state replaces the liberal state to redistribute the power and wealth that has been denied to the proletariat. And eventually the socialist state will become unnecessary because it's fulfilled its purpose, and it will wither away. And we will reach the final stage of history, communism.